All right, so we're going to kick this off today. I guess, I mean, again, thank you so much for being here. I know 12 p.m. doesn't always work for everyone, but I appreciate your time today. The personal statement workshop is something I've done 2 or 3 times now at Northeastern, and I enjoy it. Just for some background, if you don't know me, my name is Rob. I'm sure I've met with many of you, but some of you may not know me. I am one of the advisors in the office. I work with pre-med students, last names H through P, as well as all pre-vet and pre-optometry students. I was an English major in undergrad, so this is actually somewhat fun for me. For many of you, this may be a torturous process, but I hope I can help you through it, or that your pre-health advisor can help you through it to some degree. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technical aspects of the personal statement first up. Then we'll do a little bit of a writing exercise, again, not mandatory. And then we'll jump into some structures that I've seen work really well in the past, as well as just some tips and tricks for what you should be looking to include and not include in your personal statement. And then we'll have some questions, time for questions at the end. So hopefully that sounds like a good plan to everyone. We will charge forward starting now. Okay. So first up, the personal statement that you're writing will ultimately depend on the prompt of the application you're going to be submitting. For many of you, most of you, it's probably going to be the top three, one or two of the top three here. So you see AMCAS, which is the MD application, ACOMOS, the DO, ADIA ADSAS, the dental. Obviously, for pre-vet students, pre-podiatry, pre-PA, pre-optometry, those other statements are there, and they're all relatively similar. But again, the majority of you are going to be focusing on the top three. As you can see, and again, the majority of you will be applying to MD schools. It's a pretty brief prompt, right? Use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. Wow, that's super helpful. But in a way it is, because it allows you to be creative. So ultimately, when you're starting your drafts, which hopefully if you haven't done yet, you're doing today or shortly after, you want to make sure that you're keeping this initial prompt in mind. No matter what you write about, no matter what experiences you include, you need to answer the ultimate question here. Why do you want to go to medical school? Why do you want to become a dentist? Why do you want to work with animals? You have to convince the admissions committee that you know what you're doing, you've proven that to yourself, and here are the reasons why. So read through these. Obviously, these will be presented in the applications as you write them, but this is a good place just for you to kick it off. Next thing that's obviously technically very important is the length of these personal statements. So as you can see, many of them are pretty similar, and a lot of the 2022 applications obviously haven't opened just yet. So these are subject to change, but traditionally this has been what the lengths are. The DO essay actually updated just last year, 2 years ago, to match the MD essay, but we have no indication that's going to change. Most of these statements are about a page to a page and a half. So you don't have a ton of space here to talk about, your biggest motivating driving factors and your life story and your pre-health journey. So you're going to have to do a lot of synthesizing and a lot of reflecting to really understand what you want to include in this statement. One thing to note for pre-vet students who may be watching this at any point, last year on the application, the personal statement was actually removed, and they replaced it with 3 shorter essays, which was not a very popular move. They've actually reinstated the personal statement this year, but have certainly cut it down to just 3,000 characters. So it's much shorter, but again, ultimately, you're going to be asked here to squish a good amount of information and passion into a shorter blurb, if you will. Oh, I have a student saying there is no audio. Can anyone else hear me? Yes. Okay. Annika, maybe an audio issue on your end. Hopefully you can figure that out. If not, this will be posted afterwards. We'll send out the link to the recording. So if you can't hear me now, you will be able to hear me when you watch it back in the future. Okay, so now I want to do a little bit of writing exercise. So if you do have pen and paper or laptop or notes app handy, I'd like to walk through this with you. This whole thing shouldn't take more than 10 minutes total. So what I'd like you to do is create 5 different lists. This is going to be the influences activity. So for your first list, I'd like you to list 4 individuals that have impacted your pre-health journey, right? So 4 people you have worked with, looked up to, interacted with, that you can recall really clearly that have played a role in some part in the experiences that you've had. So just list those 4 people on your paper, on your computer. Don't need to put any more details about them, no background, just kind of their names or their title. All right, when you've done, you've listed your 4 individuals, I'd like you to then list 4 experiences that have impacted your pre-health journey. Now, what I mean by experiences, I don't want you to write, a paragraph for each item here, but just list what it was. So was it my first co-op, volunteering at Rosie's place, my role as the vice president of Pre-Soma, whatever it might have been, just list those 4 experiences that have been really big for you over the past couple of years. All right. So your third list, I'd like you to list 4 reasons you want to be a doctor, dentist, vet, optometrist, etc. So like 4 motivations, right? 4 motivating factors that you've discovered at this point as to why you're making this choice to go into this field. So you could write something like to tackle disparities in healthcare, or to focus more on research in oncology. You know what I mean? Like something like that, things that you are excited to do or plan to do in the future. To anyone joining right now, we're just doing a little bit of a writing exercise. You joined in the middle of it, but if you can write down, at least start making a list of some influences that have popped up on your pre-health journey, that would be helpful. All right, for your 4th list, I'd like you to write down 4 failures that have shaped your pre-health journey. Now, what I mean by this is 4 instances where maybe you didn't reach what you were hoping to reach, where you either feel you let yourself down or somebody else down, that have kind of stayed with you. And as we always talk about failures, especially from our perspective, that you've learned from and have been able to grow from. So if you can list 4 of those. And again, I know that some of these are really difficult maybe to get 4, but just do your best here. All right. And for your last list, your 5th list, I'd like you to write down 4 successes or achievements that have shaped your pre-health journey. So what are those 4 moments where you really are proud of, that you feel like, wow, this is big, or I'm really happy to have seen this or achieved this or accomplished this? I'll give everyone about 30 more seconds and then we'll jump into the action part of this activity. Okay, so even if you haven't finished and you don't have 20 items listed in front of you, this will still be an effective exercise, but do your best to have those 20 items in front of you. So the first thing I want you to do is look at these lists that you've created, the 20 items you have, and cross out or delete 6 of them. Now, when you do that, I want you to interpret it as these things did not happen. These things were never achieved, or you never experienced that or met that person. This is meant to be difficult. It's not supposed to be easy, but you're starting to think about, again, this is driving you towards what has been the most influential experiences or people over the past couple of years. So please take away 6 from that list of 20. Okay, now once you've taken away 6, I'm then going to ask you to take away 5 more. Yes, Ariel. So you're crossing out the ones that you're making difficult decisions right now and removing experiences from this kind of list that you've created, and they're no longer going to be part of your journey. We're pretending, obviously, but yes, the ones that impacted your journey the least, or you're the most ready to let go of at this point. So you've taken away 6, then you've taken away 5. Now I'm going to ask you to take away 4 more. And then final step here, I just want you to take away 2 more. And when you take away these 2, you'll be left with 3 final influences. I'll give you a second to make that final choice now. Okay, so this activity, I've done this a good number of times before, and it impacts everyone in a different way. You may be surprised by the 3 final influences that you have in front of you, or you may just say, I always knew that these 3 were going to be my top 3 and I'm not surprised at all. But what it's going to do, and what it hopefully has helped you to do, is start the wheels turning to understand and discover what is motivating you on this journey. What are the 3 things that have impacted you the most, that you think about the most, that you have learned from and potentially are paying forward the most? Who are the people that have influenced you the most, and why? What are the qualities about these people, or what have you seen them do that has just been very inspiring to you? That's what I want you to start thinking about. and really examining how you got to the point where you allowed yourself to remove 17 other important things to keep these three. Now, this is obviously not a science and it is very abstract. So please do not feel beholden to those three things you see in front of you, but hopefully it's given you an idea again of what is motivating you going forward. Now, for the second part of this, I would like to do some free writing. So again, if you have that paper or something to type on, I'd like you to take about 5 minutes now just to free write. So thinking about the influences that you have in front of you, you can obviously think about the ones you removed as well. Just write about what you're most proud about, or write details about those three things you see in front of you and why you think that they're there. And just keep writing until I chime back in. We'll take about 5 minutes to do this. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I just want you to get your thoughts down on paper or on the screen. If you did just join us or are not sure what's going on right now with the silence, we're doing about a 5-minute free writing activity based on some influences that everyone just listed. So if you are just jumping in now, if you want to make a list of some of the most influential things that have impacted you on your pre-health journey and spend a few minutes writing some details about why you think that is, that's what we're doing right now. And I'll chime back in when those 5 minutes are up. About 1 more minute, and then we'll continue. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I hope you're able to get some of your thoughts down on paper, or just kind of out loud, if you will, that you can review that later. What I want you to do now with the material you've created is start looking for things that either blend or connect or are potential themes you could use as the core, the backbone, the spine of your personal statement, right? So as you've written, if there are important concepts that have come up that you're very happy with or are passionate about, um, that you've seen perhaps in other people as they've practiced, or you've been able to demonstrate in your own work, in clinical work, research, volunteer work, whatever it may be, um, please circle those. Really, you want to make sure that you're capturing those, and not letting them go. And that's part of the creative process, right? Is when you've created content like this, sometimes you're able to produce, or really see things that you aren't able to just think, right? When you're writing, when you're allowing yourself that freedom, to just kind of go for it, you start to see things that, oh, that connects to that, that relates to that. Um, and suddenly two experiences that you thought had nothing to do with each other, or even nothing to do with, your immediate career in the future, suddenly they do have commonality. Suddenly you see a theme that connects them. Um, uh, an example I usually use is like resiliency, right? I've certainly had students write in the past, their personal statement about that theme of resiliency. How has that been something that has popped up in your different experiences, and how can that serve as the connecting thread and fiber, between all the things you're planning to write about in your personal statement? So I'd actually ask you to like underline, draw lines, make this look like a real planning document, um, when you're going back and beginning your draft. If you've already started your draft, hopefully this can help to inform it, or just further, clarify or provide more detail to how you hope to flesh out your personal statement. And again, for all of you that are going through the committee letter process right now, you've done your, self-assessment, which is a huge reflection document. Reflection does not end there with this process. For anyone applying to these programs, reflection on what you've learned and, what you've pulled out of these experiences is going to be a repeating theme. So again, what were the major themes you saw from what you've written, from what the influences that you've, narrowed down to? Are there connections there? Are you able to build a personal statement around one of those? And will that statement answer some important questions here, which are, who are you? Where are you coming from? Why are you doing this? And how are you qualified, right? So people, and applicants are able to pull in experiences that aren't directly related to medicine. Um, and they do it by finding those commonalities that exist between the non-medical, the non-clinical, the non-research, and the directly related experiences to your health graduate program. You find those, and you can make a flowing argument. If you're including different things and you're not finding a theme, it becomes a disjointed statement where the reader isn't able to figure out, why you talked about that volunteer experience and how that relates to your research. How is that? How are you blending those together? How are you finding a good transition to get from point A to point B? Again, those themes, those connections, that's how you do it. It opens the doors for you to be able to say, I want to, educate people in my career as a physician, and I've been able to do that in this experience when I was working in a clinical setting, and I've been able to do that when I was tutoring on campus at Northeastern. These two are very different experiences, but here's the commonality here. I was able to impart knowledge and share my knowledge and help that person, achieve greater goals. There's the commonality, and that's how you create a strong, cohesive statement. All right. So to consider, things to include in your personal statement. Again, those defining moments are important, and we'll talk a little bit in a second about, different approaches that applicants have taken in the past. Um, Sometimes people will write about one specific event, other times they'll write about multiple events, or telling a story, right? The timeline of your path to medical or dental school. Either way is fine, but make sure you're talking about, again, really impactful moments that have popped up along your journey. This may sound obvious, but you want your personal statement to be a positive and creative document. And when I say creative, I don't mean that you need to write a really long poem here. I want you to showcase your passion and your interest in your field through your words. That needs to be there. What sometimes happens, and I've seen this, and many of us have seen this, is that a personal statement will sometimes look like a template or a form letter or an extended resume, and it comes off as a very dry document where we don't get to learn much about you. That's not going to help anyone determine if you're a good fit or applicant for their program. So please make sure that you are including your personality, your passion, your interests as you're writing this statement. Another thing to avoid is overly technical language. So if you're using jargon or cliches or kind of phrases that other people would tend to include in their writing, it kind of muddles the picture a little bit. There's a lot of different people that are going to be reading this statement, from admissions committees to faculty to physicians, even community members sometimes sit on admissions committees at different schools. So you want it to be graspable by everyone that's reading this, and not too technical. If you're talking about research and how that's played an important role in your career, that's important. Just make sure you're not going too deep to the point that a layperson like myself, or even a community member or an admissions committee member, is not able to understand what you're talking about. So please consider your audience as you're writing this. One other thing that I think is important is talking about what you want to contribute to your profession beyond just applying and getting into a program. A lot of people end their statement with, "This is the impact I'm hoping to have on my field and my career. This is the legacy that I'm going to hope to leave if you give me this opportunity," right? That is a very powerful thing to say, because if you can showcase to admissions committees that you already see your place in the field, you already know what you're hoping to accomplish or achieve on a broad scale, right? Not that you need to label a specialty here, but if you're able to say, I hope to expand knowledge and research around this unique disease or these diseases, or work with this community that's been overlooked in the past, you're already showcasing to them that you know what you're doing, you've looked into this, you've done your research, and you see your place in the field in the future. It's very powerful. Other things at the end, the bottom points here. Sometimes personal statements can be a place for applicants to talk about things that maybe didn't go the best in their pre-health trajectory. You may see some advice on the internet about addressing things like grades or MCAT scores on a personal statement. I'm not as supportive of that type of methodology, simply because when I've seen that done in the past, it often looks like it's just shoehorned into the statement for a mention and doesn't really fit with the flow of the rest of the story. So what I would say for anyone that's looking to potentially address something like this on their application, do that through secondaries and supplemental applications. Typically, there is going to be a question on there asking you, do you want to address anything? Instead of trying to squish it into your personal statement, which should focus more on positive things. If something like that is a big part of your story and your narrative, of course you can talk about it, but don't feel that you have to push something like that in here. And of course, we will talk through that as we review your drafts in the future. Okay, so two of the approaches that I've seen pretty frequently in the past are ones that I've kind of named the journey and the deep dive, right? So I'd say the most common one is that journey, trying to talk about the timeline or the path to medical, dental, vet school, etc. And a good way that students have done this in the past is beginning with a good detailed hook on a specific time or experience in their lives that really introduces that theme, right? That's the central core that we were talking about earlier. Then they take 2 to 3 anecdotes from other experiences that support that theme, and then end with a conclusion that reiterates the theme, talks about, like I said before, what you're hoping to do in the future, what impact, what focus you want to have in your career. And that seems to be a really great way to also showcase to admissions committees that you're experienced enough to be a good applicant for their program, to do well in their program. You're talking about what you've learned, you're talking about your experiences, saying, I'm qualified for this, but also here's what I've learned and here's what I plan to do. You're giving them everything they need through this journey-esque construction. And on the other hand, the deep dive has also been really powerful, especially for students or applicants who have had one of those experiences where they've realized, wow, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. This has changed my trajectory completely. Not everyone's had that, so please don't feel like you're losing out if you haven't had an experience like that. It's okay, but if you had, it's okay to write your entire statement around one experience. At the end of the day, you still need to make sure that you're hitting you have themes to address and you're answering that main question, why do you want to do this? But you can do that by telling a story about one event if it truly was impactful and you have enough details for that event. Some things to think about: how did this event actually help you arrive where you are today? How did it get you to where you are? How has it motivated you? And how did it confirm for you that, yes, this is the right path for me? And again, your pre-health advisors are here to look over your first drafts, and by no means are your first drafts, do they need to look like your final draft. Sometimes it looks completely different. So don't be afraid to just try something, especially early on, like now, just to see how it goes, how you feel about it. And if you want to completely change it, that's absolutely fine. One key thing to remember here, when you're reading your personal statement back or having other people read it, one of the things you want to make sure it's provoking is that the reader wants to know more. They want more information. They want to get to know you a little bit better, right? This is kind of that final, or one of the final things that an admissions committee is going to look at before they decide, okay, do we want to invite this person for an interview? If your personal statement is intriguing and talks about your passions and where you see yourself going, they're going to want to know more about that. And they're going to want you to elaborate on that and tell them what you've done or what you plan to do to make that a reality. So think about that as well. Does this statement really motivate people to want to ask more questions about what I've done and where I hope to go? Obviously, there are some things that you should definitely avoid in a personal statement that can be red flags or kind of allow admissions committees to say, no, thank you, or this one isn't that good. Being generic is obviously something you certainly want to avoid. One thing I always say to my advisees, if you could erase your name and put somebody else's name on it, and this would still be a true statement for them, that's not good. You know, this needs to be something that only you could submit, that no one else could say, actually, this describes me too, and here you go. So make sure you're being detailed and specific with what you're writing about. Try not to include quotes. I certainly have had applicants inject quotes or short phrases from other people into their statements in the past, but try not to do it too much. You know, as an English major myself, I do certainly remember using quotes to fill up space on assignments. And not that that was always a bad thing, but this is from your voice, this is your perspective, and putting too many quotes or a large quote takes away from that for a second. If like a patient, for example, said something really impactful to you and you want to reiterate that, that's okay, that's fine. But just be careful about including way too much of somebody else's voice. Clearly, you shouldn't be focusing on the negative here. Again, if you've had a negative experience, that is okay. And again, we always talk about spinning negatives into positive. Make sure you're talking about lessons learned, things you've taken away from it, growth from that negative experience. But what you don't want to do is potentially write negative things about a supervisor you've had in the past, or completely trash an experience, or say that an EMT job is just miserable and awful. Even if that was your experience, again, you want to present this in a more professional way, where you're saying, you know, I didn't have a great experience here. This is why, and this is what I've learned from that going forward. So there's a way to phrase everything, and certainly will help you with that if you're having trouble. Don't try to cover everything in this statement. That's not what this is about. You're not doing a complete review of your resume and your experiences. That's what your application is for. That's what your secondaries are for. That's what your interview is for. This is not meant to cover everything. So don't try to. That's where it starts to become laborious to read through those statements. Make sure your writing is clear. You don't want people to misinterpret anything you're saying or think something differently than what you intended it to. And a lot of that will be clarified through proofreading. The sample that I've included here below is certainly hyperbole, but you don't want to brag too much in your statement. Obviously, you'll be talking about your achievements and your experiences that you've had, but as you can see in this sample here, this person went way overboard in their description of their heroics here, and it comes off as pompous and a little self-centered, and you can see the amount of times this person used the word I just in one paragraph. So be careful of that. You don't want to over-aggrandize yourself in your personal statement. Again, I've also read statements where the actual central question of why do you want to do this was never answered. So please make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're writing. Sensitive information. This is actually something I'd want you to talk to your pre-health advisor about directly, either in your committee that are meeting if you're going through that process, or just in an advising meeting before you apply. Applicants and students have often asked about including things about their own personal health or things they've gone through and whether that's okay to include or not. We'd want to have a conversation with you about that and ask you if it's truly relevant to your path. If it is, we want to talk about how to phrase that in the best way, but there may be some topics where we say, we're not sure that this is the best to include because it could potentially create a situation where someone who's reading it or someone that's evaluating it could be biased or potentially make a judgment about you that's unfair. I don't want to be too specific about what that might be right now, but certainly if you talk to your advisor about anything that you're kind of like, I don't know if I should include this or not, we'll help walk you through that. We want you to be honest and clear with your personal statement, but again, we want to make sure that you're not opening yourself up to potential judgment or bias from those that are reading it. Some things that you obviously should include in your personal statement. I know this sounds obvious, but please be personal. This is about you. This is your thoughts, your reactions, your feelings and emotions. Please talk about those things. Central theme, like I said before, without a backbone, a statement seems kind of all over the place and disjointed. So before you begin writing your first draft, again, I would ask that you try to find that central theme and write around it. Easy to follow. I truly believe that going in chronological order is the best way to do this. Again, that may also sound obvious, but I've certainly seen a lot of applicants bounce things around because they think it thematically works better that way. Certainly you can try that, but again, because this is going to a wide audience and people that have different backgrounds and professions, you want to make sure it's easy to follow and clear. There should be no errors on your personal statement. Again, that sounds obvious, but certainly I've seen them on final submissions. Having other people read them, proofread it, provide feedback is a great way to make sure you're not including anything or not including any errors, excuse me. And then a final point here that I see broken a lot is that you need to be the main character of your personal statement. Many times people or applicants will describe situations as an observer from the background, right? I saw this, I witnessed this, this happened. While it's okay to obviously talk about observations you've had along the way, you want to also include things that you've been, a direct actor in as well. How have you interacted or what choices did you make around those situations? If everything you're talking about is you in the background, it's going to be very hard to learn who you are through that. And this is just a really good example of someone's concluding paragraph where they're able to really tie everything back together and make a final statement, right? That's their final kind of call here. I look forward as a physician to experiencing the satisfaction of saving lives, curing ailments, alleviating pain, and overall making life better for my patients. That is this person's motivation. That is where they see that what they see themselves doing in the future. And all their experiences have helped clarify that for them. So that is the kind of statement you want to make at the end there. This has these things have happened to me. I've experienced these things. I've met these people. And for all that, I now hope to do X. Start now. So again, I know many of you have already started working on drafts, but this is the time to jump into it. If you're studying for the MCAT, I certainly understand that you may be stressed with time, and will focus mostly on your personal statement, perhaps after you've taken the exam. The personal statement isn't due until you submit your application. Usually that's in May or June. So you have a lot of time, but the more you work on this, the better and more polished it's going to be, the more confident you're going to feel in it. So please start working now, even if you're just brainstorming or outlining. It can help to actually put times in your calendar to sit down and write. Again, as a former English major, as someone who writes or who likes to write, I find it very difficult to find time to sit down and be creative. And often I do need to schedule that into my calendar to force myself into those moments. I know it sounds weird to say I'm forcing myself to be creative right now, but we're all busy people. So please make time for this as the weeks go on here and turn into months. And feedback, right? You want to make sure you're sending this out to people, you're revising things as they go, and repeat that process over and over again until you're confident in your statement. Like I said before, please make sure your statement is error-free. One idea on here that I think is good is actually to read it out loud. When we're reading, just with our eyes, we tend to fill in the blanks of errors that we've made. It happens to all of us. If you're reading it out loud, you're far more likely to catch any omitted words, phrases, errors that pop up. So doing that, sending that out to other people, that will clarify and remove errors from your statement. And feedback is going to be the most important thing for you as you go forward. Our advice, have people who know you really well read this statement. Ask them, does this sound like me? Does this actually sound like it's my voice? Or does it sound like a whole different person that's trying to be somebody else for an admissions committee? They will know if it sounds like you or not. People who don't know you as well, right? Maybe you have a more professional relationship with them. Ask them, what did you learn about me from this draft? Is it giving you new information you didn't have before? Are you understanding a little bit more about why I'm doing this? Us, obviously, we can answer both of those questions, but also how is this going to be interpreted by an admissions committee, right? What are they going to be seeing? What are some potential red flags or positives that they're going to see from the statement I've created here? Those of you going through the committee letter process, just another reminder to please have a draft ready by your committee letter meeting date, and you can paste that draft onto your MAP profile and we'll be able to see it that way, or you can always email us a copy beforehand. If you're not going through the committee letter process, again, you can always work with us directly through an advising meeting or just sending along a copy for us to look over. An underutilized resource at Northeastern is the Writing Center, open to current students and alumni. The link is there. We'll send the PDF out after. But online appointments are certainly good here. Have them look over your writing. They are experts at this, and they can certainly guide you if you're truly stuck, even after talking to everybody else. And one more thing here, in the end, this is your statement, right? When you're getting feedback from other people, and again, I've seen this happen as well, especially when someone may be directly editing a draft that you send them, make sure you're looking over that again and not just fully accepting every edit that someone's putting in there, right? Because if you keep doing that over time, you're going to have this kind of zombie personal statement that was written by you originally, but suddenly a lot of the parts have been replaced from other people's perspectives and viewpoints. So just make sure at the end of the day, you're the one that is approving these changes and are comfortable with these changes. So this is your voice and nobody else's voice. And just last thing before we jump into some questions, I know everyone is looking on forums and Reddit and the internet in general. Try not to worry about what your peers are doing or writing about. I think it's fine to look up examples online, but what I don't want you to do is look at a website that says the person that wrote this personal statement got into medical school or dental school. What I don't want you to do is copy and paste that and then write over it with your own experiences. That's not going to work. That formula isn't really a thing. It really has to be your own story. Like I said before, don't wait. Start planning now. Even if it's not a full draft, please start outlining now. You'll know when it's done when you have that feeling where you're comfortable with it. And I've seen this literally on applicants' faces before. They feel, oh, okay, yeah, this sounds more like me. I like this now. It may take you a couple months to get there. You will get there. Final thing, there's no one way to do this. Like I said, there's no formula to writing a personal statement. You have to try a few different things. Sometimes you have to kind of add on some tracks over the course, but you will get there. We will help you get there. And you have support systems to work with you. So please don't feel alone in this process. And with that, please send any questions you have through chat, and I will do my best to answer them. It's not mandatory to have a draft ready by the committee letter meeting. We would prefer it, as that is kind of a pre-positioned time for us to talk about it. But if you don't, it's okay. We can work on that with you after your committee letter meeting, especially for those of you that have booked them so early. Character count, including spaces. I don't believe it does for most of the applications. I can double check on that and include that in my email today, but I don't think it includes spaces. I believe it's just the characters themselves. Good question. So students that are applicants that are looking to apply to 2 different application systems, right? And typically this is just going to be those looking at MD and DO programs. 2 different personal statements. Potentially you could. Certainly not necessary, but you could, especially if you wanted to highlight some of the tenets of osteopathic medicine in your statement for the AACOMAS application. But if you write a singular draft of a personal statement and you look at it and you say, you know what, this covers basically what I'm trying to do. It really covers my bases and it applies to MD and DO. There's no reason to write 2, but you have the option to do that if you want to. I haven't seen that done very often. I'd say most people applying to MD and DO typically use the same personal statement. Yeah, so the question is it okay to talk about maybe one specialty or focus on one specialty in the personal statement? I would be careful with that. So I think it's okay to talk about your experiences, especially if your experiences have been focused around one specialty, and talk about what you've gained from that and maybe the change or what you hope to bring to the field, and say, I've noticed these commonalities in my experiences, and I'm passionate about helping people work through the specific struggle. What I think is you might want to avoid a little bit more is saying, I am very passionate about this specialty and I only see myself doing this specialty. Even if that's true, I think putting that in a personal statement could potentially turn off some people on the admissions committee, especially if their program, for example, doesn't have a lot of students that go into that specialty. They may think, well, this isn't really the program for that person. And your mind can be completely changed in medical school too. That certainly happens as well. So while I think it's okay to talk about a thematic representation of your experiences, maybe pointing towards helping people in a certain light or fashion, I wouldn't want you to say, this is the specialty for me and here's why, type of thing. If you want us to look at your personal statement, I would say, especially outside of a committee letter meeting, I'd say just email it directly to us and say, hey, this is my latest draft. Could you get back to me when you have time? If you have an upcoming committee letter meeting, just put it on your MAP portal and we will read it before our committee letter meeting. Yeah, so for mental health crises, again, that was certainly one of the sensitive topics from earlier that I'd want you to talk directly with your pre-health advisor about. If it's a mental health crisis of somebody else that you were helping work through that with that person, that's fine. Um, that can happen with patients as well, but it's a little bit more, you want to be a little bit more careful when talking about your own health and well-being. That's the difference. If you're talking about working with somebody else, you can talk about what you learned from that situation and how it may directly influence how you treat patients in the future. And if it's something that potentially impacted performance, yeah, so I think that goes back to my point earlier. If you can't pull a positive out of that situation and say, this was really hard, but here's why it helped me grow, that could be good material for a personal statement. But if you just want to, or if you're just looking to explain why something happened in a more matter of fact way, I would say save that for your secondary applications. Any other questions right now? I think I brought up most of the, oh, here's a question. Yes. So like I said before, if you have an interest, right? If I don't want you to feel like, oh, and actually this happens a lot with mental health and psychiatry. I think that's probably the most pointed specialty that I've seen students always wanting to focus on, or they know they want to go into, which is interesting. But again, it's fine to talk about your passion for supporting patients through a specific type of crises or disease, whatever it may be. I think you just want to try avoiding the wording of this is the specialty that I want to do. And here's why. I think it's more about saying, this is the kind of change I want to make. This is the kind of impact I want to have on patients going forward. And here's why, and pull from your mental health experiences if you've had those. That's the difference. It's just how you're phrasing it and how you're presenting it. And again, I guess it's hard to answer specifically questions about where it's pointing or how detailed it's going to be until I read a draft of it and can say, okay, this is like, from my perspective, this is too pointed towards this specialty. Try lightening up a little bit, or try making this a little bit more general towards healthcare in general. So we'll get to that in the future. But again, don't be afraid of your first draft. Don't feel like your first draft has to be perfect at all or needs to hit certain things. Just get a draft on paper, and then we'll go from there. So CPS students, if you're in your application year, you can work with the three of us in the office. Everyone has an assigned pre-med or pre-health advisor. I work with last names H through P if you're pre-med. Sierra O'Donnell, our assistant director, works with students' last names Q through Z. So she would be the person you'd want to reach out to if you haven't already interacted with her to look over a personal statement. All right, I'll stick around for another couple minutes if anybody has any more questions, but otherwise, I really appreciate you all spending time with me today. Hopefully the writing exercise was helpful. You were able to get some thoughts out on paper. Please follow up with us with drafts. This is going to be a long process. I recommend starting now, but otherwise, always email us if you have questions. And again, I appreciate you popping in today.